everybody out there in YouTube land. And wow, I went to bed last night and we were 7 subs short of 1,000. I wake up this morning, Ironcaster busted his ass apparently and got on some other people's shows and told them to start subbing to me. And I wake up this morning and here we are. We're 1,000. So yay me.
Woohoo!
And thanks to everybody out there who subscribed. Man, I really do appreciate it. Nice thing is I already applied to YouTube to get monetized and stuff a long time ago whenever I was able to be eligible for super chats and stuff. So I didn't have to apply for anything. All I had to do was go turn on monetization and bam, there I am. So I don't necessarily know that all of the videos will get monetized because, we have a tendency to use some language of questionable nature sometimes, and YouTube doesn't like that. But fortunately, I've had some of the foresight to give us enough time, from the start of the show to the magical grace period where we can say kind of what we want to.
Yes.
Although I've heard that YouTube is actually not liking you to use, like the queen mother of dirty words at all these days. I don't know.
It's unpredictable and whimsical, it seems.
Yes, it is. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to just be really careful about what we say and who we invite on. So Jason can never come on. No, I'm just kidding. No, really, I'm happy. I don't really remember when I started this thing. I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago. And there were a lot of times I really felt like just packing it in and saying, this ain't going to happen, because I'd watch other channels just fly by and, So I'm really not sure how to feel. I'm still kind of like waking up to it, I guess. I don't know. Maybe if and when the YouTube paychecks start rolling in, I'll start feeling better. But I'll start feeling, we really made it.
There's luck, there's gaming the system, or there's the grind. So it's the grind. But the channel's visibility should go up a bit. Now it's monetized. So you might find it easier to get a few more subs.
Well, I hope so. No, Ironcaster, you're not done as a regular panelist. You're one of my ride or dies, dude. You got to be with me. In fact, the only reason you're not on these Tuesday mornings is because I know you're working. So, but here we are. I wasn't sure what to make today's video about, but I started thinking about it. I cut a video, not too long ago that was talking about entertainment and how we now have access to so much entertainment that it is very overwhelming. You're so not starved for choices, because you now have so many choices of what you can watch, what you can read, what you can interact with as far as hands-on hobbies. It's insane. And there's so many communities out there that support all these kind of things. And, tabletop gaming is pretty much the same way. So I thought we would talk about today what the state of gaming is, what's good, what isn't good, what we can look forward to, what mechanics are hot, what ideas are good, things like that. Just generally talk about what it is that players of all stripes can enjoy in the hobby or look forward to in the hobby. Because right now, I think you have so many choices for tabletop role-playing games that it's really overwhelming. And case in point, I have Grim over here who does live stream gaming with a new game every couple of weeks in order to test out one of his stack of books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should never have done a mini campaign. I'm behind now. I was catching up.
And I'm honestly tempted to do the same thing. It's just the only reason I don't do it is because I feel like in order to really test a system out, you got to give it a few tries and kind of like see, because the first time you play anything like that, players are unsure of rules and people don't necessarily get it, and they don't get time to really fall into their characters and really get to absorb the material. It's kind of like, oh, wham bam, thank you ma'am, we're done. And sadly, it's kind of like, and this is not a disparaging remark, Grim, but what tends to happen is like unless it's a game that just hits you with such awesome mechanics that you're just instantly pulled in and captivated, and you're going like, yeah, this is really good. I like this. No, I want to do this again. They all kind of start to run together, because it's like, I could not tell you, if Barbarians of Lemuria is better than, I don't know, was it Wheel of Fire?
Oh, Burning Wheel.
Burning Wheel, yeah.
Barbarians of Lemuria is clearly better than Burning Wheel.
Well, I don't know. Burning Wheel, that's the one where I had the wolf nearly kill me while I was on watch.
Yes.
Yeah, that was pretty memorable, but not in a good way.
Yes, and according to the rather rabid Burning Wheel fans, I shouldn't have actually played out a combat using the combat rules. I should have just had you roll to resolve the encounter.
Then why make the combat rules?
Well, yeah. That was my thought. And that interpretation is only found on one line of optional supplementary material, but the Burning Wheel community has apparently decided that is the way to do it, and they expect everyone to do it the same way. I don't know. Some games have weirdly fanatical fans who are very angry if you don't like it for whatever reason.
Well, see, I don't get that. It's like you have so many forms of gaming entertainment you can enjoy, so many different styles of gaming with so many different mechanics, so many different settings, that just because you don't like one or two that's particularly popular, that shouldn't be a condemnation. I mean, why does anybody have to like the current edition of D&D? Because it's the biggest?
Because if you don't, you're a racist, homophobic bigot. That's why.
and Driving in Dragons, yes, we are. We made the 1K mark. Thank you very much. Actually, Lord Thoth, monetization, we turned it on this morning, so we're good. I am Sylviu. Good is subjective. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Very much so. Very much so. And
that's the flip side of what you're saying about there being so much stuff out there, right? There's too much stuff out there, and there's no real mechanism by which to go through it all, to be aware of it all, to know what's good and what's bad. There aren't really sort of taste makers. There's no gatekeeping. That's good in a lot of ways, and I wouldn't want to go back to the way things were with just a handful of companies producing stuff. But equally, it's overwhelming. There's a fire hose of games, most of which are basically the same thing in a lot of ways. So many fantasy heartbreakers, so many things rigged off the 5th edition rules, so many unfinished 2-page half-baked ideas on itch.io. How are you supposed to navigate this? Well, we don't really have any websites that do really broad reviews and examinations of games. Forum sites like EN World and RPGNet don't have the influence they once did. Influencers, if they're successful, are mostly D&D oriented. It's difficult.
Yeah, one major issue, it's very difficult to get adequate reviews for these games. Yes, yeah. And honestly, this one of the reasons I have a hard time reviewing games is because I know somebody, for the most part, worked hard writing this stuff up and coming up with ideas and putting it down on paper and trying to market it out and all that. And it's really hard to say, bad things about somebody else's work. You want to be kind of nice about it, kind of charitable. You don't want to just tell somebody, you know what, your system is just complete garbage, man. Your ideas are just stupid. Because the fact is that they didn't think it was bad, and obviously they must have play tested it to some degree, right?
Yeah, I've kind of dealt with that by thinking, right, if I don't give my honest opinion, then it's no use to whoever made the game. It's no use to whoever might buy the game. And I'm trying to remember to add sort of some advice from my years in the industry to the end of reviews and say, oh, yeah, these things would make the game better. So try and be constructive at the end of it.
Yeah. And Aaron, yeah, you're correct. Garbage survives forever now. There were lots of garbage games in the 80s and 90s, but now it's on the internet forever. Hey, I have a ton of garbage games sitting in my closet. I mean, and they all had good ideas, good settings, good everything. I mean, this is going to be a hot take, but okay, Cyborg Commando was a good idea. It was a good idea that was poorly implemented. Right?
Yeah.
That's what I would say. And I think one of the deals is, so many people like D&D is because, they didn't really have a competitor for a long time. I don't want to pull out my timeline of gaming history, but I mean, like, I don't recall what the timeline difference is between when OD&D first hit print versus, when Traveler came out versus when Tunnels and Trolls came out and all that stuff, or when Chaosium's Glorantha and stuff came out. But
Tunnels and Trolls was pretty early.
Yeah, Tunnels and Trolls was pretty early. But it was pretty close to the same time that D&D released. But I think one of the reasons that D&D has proven itself to be so popular is because it is kind of timeless, because people do keep going back to it, because people do keep riffing on it as far as iterations, the 6 stats, the levels, and even the character classes and stuff like that. I mean, it stood the test of time. That's why it still exists. Of course, it also still exists because, all the IP holders keep, trying to ram new editions down your throat.
So D&D was late 74, because it was August people got pre-release copies, I think, and then September people got the proper copies. Tunnels and Trolls was 1975, so very quick after. And Traveler, appropriately enough, was 1977.
Yeah, and arguably, Tunnels and Trolls is still around, but it never hit the popularity of AD&D.
They did really well when solo game books were doing really well. Mm-hmm. And then the actual RPG was kind of an afterthought. And now, weirdly, Rebellion Software own the Tunnels and Trolls rights. So,
yeah, I mean, well, Vampire the Masquerade. I'm not sure if it still endures or not. I mean, it's certainly the current form of vampire is not the vampire that we grew up with.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I don't like the hunger mechanics, but
No, me neither. But it does lead to some interesting things. But then I play fast and loose with it, as I do with most games. I don't like
Yeah.
the presentation of the current edition.
No, I don't either. I definitely want to go back to Tim Bradstreet artwork and the original edginess that drew us into the game.
Yeah.
And, you know, I still kind of follow along with, you know, what Mark Reinhagen told us about how, you know, he didn't intend for there to be all these clans and stuff like that. You know, he wanted to do his core clans and kind of leave it with that and keep exploring that. But and yeah, Aaron, you're right. All the biggies are getting tamer and tamer to appeal to a wider audience, which makes it not appeal. Yes.
Yeah. Same with conventions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like this. It's like you have a really, really awesome Chinese restaurant, you know, something that's got, you know, homemade, you know, family recipes made by the original owners with care and love and everything else. And then you got some guy with a lot of money in a suit who says, "Hey, I want to buy the name and, you know, the recipes and stuff from your restaurant, and I want to start franchising it." And pretty soon you have Panda Express, which is the worst Chinese food ever to exist on this planet. Just straight up. So I think gaming is kind of the same way. When you start creating stuff for everybody's tastes, it stops tasting good.
Well, so you remember when World of Warcraft got big, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had plenty of smaller, massive multiplayer online games before then, right? But after Warcraft got big, everyone kept trying to copy Warcraft and be the same as Warcraft, and so every MMO was a slightly different. Yeah, it's Warcraft, but there's better crafting, or it's Warcraft, but there's lots of fishing, or whatever. But everyone was trying to be Warcraft when they should have just decided on a niche for themselves and gone hard on that. And by trying to compete with the big boy and copy the big boy, so many failures, so many. And I don't know why people don't learn that lesson. Because it happens everywhere.
Driving, you think something that would help is if reviewers and reviews focused on systems instead of actual games. It's a lot easier to review Interlock, D20, or 2 Die 20 than it is review 200 plus Die 20 games. Yes and no. This is my take on it, and you know, this is just my take, but you know, I've got a review dropping. Well, not a review, but I've got an unboxing for Ambition and Avarice dropping after this show. And Ambition and Avarice is an OSR product. And like all the OSR products, what I like about OSR products is, one, if you choose to use them, they're very familiar. Your players are likely to be very familiar with them, and they'll be very easy to get into and start playing right away. Because it's, you know, if you played OSR or OSL, or OSE, Old School Essentials. If you played Old School Essentials, you can play Ambition and Avarice 2 without a whole lot of lead time. You know, if you played Ambition and Avarice 2, you can play Scarlet Heroes pretty quickly without too many difficulties. But the other part that's handy about OSR is the fact that so many OSR variants include some rules bit that is just kind of native to that iteration of the game that is so good that it can be easily cribbed. You know, like the biggest thing that Ambition and Avarice does, in my opinion, the one thing I loved about it the most that really, really sucked me into it and made me like it was really simply, it was the trophy system. I mean, it's such a little simple thing. It's, one page of lists of stuff that you can get off of monsters, along with a detailed description on what monster parts are worth and why they're worth it and what they can do if it's ingested or whatever. But that alone made the whole purchase worth it to me, because it's something I can pull from that game and use it in some other place. Right?
Yeah.
Versus, Panic at the Dojo. Okay, I also dropped a unboxing for Panic at the Dojo. Panic at the Dojo is so incredibly different from any other type of game I've ever played, as far as the mechanics and stuff, that I'm having a difficult time figuring out how the game works. Or Lone Wolf Fists, another great game, great author and everything else, but I'm having to sit down and figure out how the mechanics of the game actually work. So I have to figure out how they work for myself, and then I have to figure out how to convey that to the players and get them comfortable with it when all they might have played are OSR variants.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, here's a car, but we put the steering wheel on top of the car, and we also made the steering wheel facing backwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're
there's a lot of old school games, which means you could free up the review to talk about the specific rules differences or the background or whatever. And there's a lot of 5th edition based games you could do the same for. But also there's a hell of a lot of other games with bespoke systems that need you to go into more depth, I think. And you can't necessarily assume that a casual audience stumbling across your review is going to know anything outside of 5e, really. Not even Call of Cthulhu or something. So you might need to go into a bit more detail for anything outside of the top dog.
Yeah. And that's another point also that is, part of the state of gaming. What are gamers like today versus, what were they like before? I mean, you have the army of grognards who they're used to doing things like, okay, we need hirelings to go into this place, so we hire a bunch of hirelings. We bring the 10-foot pole to check for traps. We do this, that, and the other. Why? Because that's how we did it back in 1977, right?
Yeah.
Versus somebody who maybe started gaming during Pathfinder 1st edition, where it's kind of like, we don't need hirelings. All of our characters are really, really powerful, and we have a rogue who is like super duper good at detecting traps because he's got like a plus 15 on his skill in detecting traps to start with. The modern audience and stuff doesn't necessarily play like the old audience. They don't have the same experiences with the games, so they don't go about their gaming the same way.
And they seem to have different expectations. I mean, that kind of illustrates the point.
Yeah, the 5e normies. Yeah, there's more 5e normies out there than anything else. And even my own group, who absolutely refuses to play 5e, would probably have more fun playing 5e than they would be playing old school D&D. And case in point, it was like pulling teeth trying to get them to play other systems when I was testing things out. I tried out Axe, and although I liked Axe, they were kind of not impressed with it because they're kind of like, well, it's just basic D&D with some new stuff, bolted on. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, but are you not appreciating the extra stuff that's bolted on? I mean, if we played this long term, no, not really. It's just I want to do more. I want to have more powers. I want to be able to do more stuff and have my my demi-humans doing more. I was like, okay, well, And that's the thing. It's like who the game market is catering to kind of makes as much of a difference as the game itself. And not to mention the way that they're played. I mean, somebody who comes from a 5e normie background tries Call of Cthulhu for the first time, and oh baby,
Short,
oh
sharp, short.
baby,
Yeah. Let's pretend with cosplay is what I would call the current style if I chose to be disparaging towards it.
Yeah. And Malwinus, your group only played a few times, no social medias. Your trusty RPG store piqued your interest in word of mouth. Like, yeah, and it was the same for me. It's like my current group. I showed up at the table with a bunch of AD&D second edition rules, and they were like, "Well, we do our own thing," And the guy had a homebrew, cobbled together game, which I had problems learning at first, but after I got into the groove of it, I started to go, "This is a really good game system, and you should publish this thing." And here we are, like almost 40 years later, and it's like, yeah, he still hasn't published it. He's not gonna.
So I think that difference is even more stark here in the UK. So when I came into gaming, I've said many times I didn't start with D&D, and that's common over here amongst the older gamers. Certainly, you didn't necessarily start with Dungeons and Dragons. You may have started with just about anything else. Then we were hit by a disaster in 1990 when Games Workshop decided we're just going to do miniatures and war games. Mm-hmm. So you went from having a role-play store on practically every high street in any town of any reasonable size to not having that. And then the D&D 5th edition boom that's come along, the new gamers only know D&D. And many of them only seem interested in D&D. You still see some of that old diversity at things like UK Games Expo and so on, but it's nothing like as varied and rich as it used to be. My game experience, D&D has been far and away the minority of the games that I've played.
Yeah, and Archer Colin, you started with D&D, but it may have been RuneQuest. Yeah, and see, I like RuneQuest. I actually think it's superior to D&D in many, many ways, but I can't get people to play it.
I
have the latest rules.
Speaking of Games Workshop, they had their own kind of version of RuneQuest, which was set in a sort of Romano-Celtic UK in history. So, a lot of people got their start with that. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but back when I was buying the old White Dwarf magazines back in the late 80s, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was kind of an offshoot of the miniatures skirmish-based war game.
Yeah.
So like if you were already collecting miniatures for the tabletop war game, back in the John Blanche days, the original John Blanche days, you could easily lift those hero characters out and play them in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I think the stats were pretty much identical.
So in the RPG, the stats were basically 10 times what the scores were in the war game. So if you had a weapon skill of 3 in the war game, it would be somewhere between 30 and 40. In the RPG. So.
All I remember about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay way back in the day was the deaths were pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, like seriously brutal. And I think that's one of the reasons why Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was so popular, because people who came out of AD&D started playing, Warhammer, and they were going, "Oh my God, this is lethal!" My character's addicted to drugs and lost a limb and all this stuff. This doesn't happen in AD&D.
It's grimy and gritty, and it had that British sense of humor and being the underdog, which afflicts our national character.
Yeah. I have not played the latest iteration of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Yes, I have the books, but having the books isn't the same as actually getting to play the game, as we all know.
Yeah.
How, I mean, okay, guys out there in the audience, how many of y'all have gaming books that you have never been able to get to the table? I mean, just be honest. I'm betting you have quite a few. You might have a big, in miniatures, if you have unpainted miniatures, we call it the pile of shame because they're unpainted. Well, how many of you guys have books of shame?
Yes, Shelf of Shame.
Shelf of Shames.
I still think Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition is the best. Second edition is okay. Third edition was a bold experiment by Fantasy Flight, but it wasn't it. And the current edition is as good as second, I think. Aaron maybe disagrees.
I have second edition and I have fourth edition. I don't have third, and my God, tracking down first edition is. I have the digital rules for first edition, but that's all I managed to get. I would still kill to get a hold of a copy of Slaves to Darkness and the Realm of Chaos. In relatively good shape. Because if I remember back in the day, Warhammer's books were not very well bound either.
No, they weren't. But Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is the only other game I can think of that has modules as famous as D&D ones, like Shadows over Bogenhafen.
Yes.
Something Rotten in Kislev. People know what those are in a way that they know about the Tomb of Horrors and so on, but other games, yeah.
And oh my gosh, we got a $50. I almost said $50K. I wish it was $50K. A $50 super chat from Squeaka. Thank you very much. Congratulations on 1K.
That's a lot of cheese.
That is a lot of cheese. My gosh, what can I give you for that? Shall we do with a hymn?
Go for it.
Okay.
Send us thy asteroid, onward, thy vengeance be on us of God. Engulf the earth in flame and fire. Obliteration we require.
Yes, now that I've hit 1K, the world can end. I will be happy. Yeah, we have a lot more diversity of TTRPGs and a lot more of them as a whole. We do. We have genres that shouldn't even exist as a tabletop RPG. And I'm talking about solar punk. Because what is there to do in a solar punk game? I mean,
well, what do you take that to mean? Because I remember some older games and books being called that, and there was stuff to do. So, what's your spin on that?
Solar punk, as I understand it, is kind of like a utopian thing where everyone's sciences and arts and everything else were all dedicated to not being exploitive, where people all accepted each other and got along, and everything was more or less sort of a utopian society. So rather than the games being based on conflict of race or creed or anything else, it becomes a game of, dealing with external problems like, oh no, we've got an asteroid, hurtling towards the planet. What can we do to stop this? Or, something like that. Something that's not, necessarily driven by somebody's greed or evil so much as, because everybody gets along.
So what it used to mean was more about recovery from a disaster or a problem, and creating and maintaining that utopia. So you would maybe evangelize it to surrounding settlements, or you would deal with problems within your own settlement that threatened that new way of doing things. So there was more traditional conflict in that sort of way. So I think you can do hopeful settings like that if you do set them against something. But I think you do still need that conflict. The kind of purely utopian stuff doesn't work because it's just dull.
Well, I mean, you know, my great goal one of these days is to run a settlement building campaign. And just by the nature of the settlement building campaign, most of your efforts are going to be directed at surviving, building, and external threats that attack the group as a whole. So in a way, I guess I'd be kind of wanting to do a solar punk campaign if we're talking to strictly anti-apocalypse.
Yeah,
because you want to create something sustainable.
But yeah, you need to build out from that premise. Like, think how the original Fallout game, the trigger for everything is the water chip's busted and you need a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a really mundane hook, but it takes your character out into the wilderness, gets them involved in all of this shit going on everywhere in trying to find a replacement. So it's how you build out from that. So can I fix the water chip? No, but there might be one outside. Okay, and take it from there. So not yes and, no but.
And ultimately, yeah, it's like you recover the water chip, and then they tell you, well, thanks for that, but since you've been out there, you're contaminated, and we don't want you bringing all your newfangled ideas and problems in here. So
yeah,
you destroy the purity of our vault.
Yeah, thanks for the chip. Off you fuck.
Yeah. I just got demonetized. Thank you, Gramp. No.
It's all right. I didn't say cut.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know, man. I mean, it's like, I guess the state of gaming is that it is good and bad these days, just because we have so many choices. So we're not stuck for choice, but we kind of are stuck for choice just because of the fact that it's like an analysis paralysis kind of thing. Because it's kind of like, okay, well, what do we play? Do we want to play Shadowrun, or do we want to play D&D, or do we want to play Call of Cthulhu, or what's everybody in the mood for tonight?
Yeah. And then how long's character creation going to take?
I still don't get the session 0 stuff, because people want to argue with me like, oh well, I mean, if you even talk about the campaign ahead of time to your players, you're doing session 0.
No.
Grim, let's roll up characters and play a game. Oh well, damn! I've just done a session 0. I don't.
No.
I don't get it. People need to get married to a game. Stop being game sluts. But that's the thing. Yeah, there's so many games to enjoy. There's so many good ideas out there. There's so many systems you want to try. Like I want to honestly give Panic at the Dojo a try if I ever figure out how the rules work.
Do you prefer a game with nice boobs or with a nice butt? And why not try both just to be sure?
Yeah. Or maybe I want my OSR to go to space, so let's play Machinations of the Space Princess. But you know me, my dedicated first love is, well, I shouldn't say first. It took a long time to get to this, but my dedicated shelf of sacred glory is all Kevin Crawford games. But honestly, I didn't come by that, quickly or easily. Okay, it took a long time of looking at a lot of other systems and playing a lot of Kevin Crawford games to where I got to the point where I'm like, yes, I really prefer his games over everybody else's. Scarlet Heroes, it's OD&D done, well, I don't want. I hate to say the word "done right" because that implies that Gygax did it wrong. He didn't do it wrong, but Crawford just took the base formula and made it better. You know, because like OD&D, he doesn't have a skill system in Scarlet Heroes, but what he does have is workable in a way that you can pretty much play it 1-for-1 with OD&D. Or, I mean, I don't know. Do you agree? Or
Yeah. I'm just looking at the conversation in the comments.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of these. Depends on how character creation works. Yeah, Archer Colin, I kind of agree. In fact, I told Raven C.S. McCracken, I really wanted to love Cinnabar, but yeah, I couldn't get through character creation. But I loved his ideas. I loved his world building. I loved his setting. And I definitely cribbed some ideas from it for my own home game. And that's why I think all games are valuable and good to have at the very least, even if you don't use the rule sets, if you get ideas from them, that they're worth having.
Yeah.
And Traveler is kind of like, the game creators I remember were pretty much quoted as saying, it's like, the character creation system was designed to be something you could do if nobody showed up to the game that night. You could still sit down and kind of have a little mini adventure of your own.
The lack of proper character progression in Traveler is an issue for a lot of groups, though, I find.
Mm-hmm. It's like popcorn. It's not filling. Campaign progression, so it can be married. Most of the itch games have, session of material. Yeah, they exist to be one and done. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, not to besmirch, Taylor Lane or anybody who uses itch. But I don't know if I'd even call them proper games. They're like ideas that are sold very cheaply.
Sketches, napkins.
Yeah.
I sell through there. I don't sell much through there. I do get the occasional sale, but it's just not my audience there. Like this whole idea of modern D&D and like fantasy baristas and so on, you could make a fun mini game or like a one-off comedy adventure out of that, and it could be fun. Yeah, how do you deal with the raging orc barbarian because you put the wrong kind of milk in his latte or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
There could be fun things to do with that, but no one wants it as part of their base game.
Mm-hmm. Engine Joe, yes, I'm very familiar with Count Dante. Count Dante and the Black Dragon Fighting Society. Yeah. I've seen a lot of... I've definitely watched a lot of videos, read a lot of history about Count Dante, and some of the people who, to this day, still use the Black Dragon Fighting Society as their basis for their martial arts. And I don't know. I guess if I really wanted to send them a bunch of money and stuff, I could probably become a member of the Black Dragon Fighting Society and then make up whatever bullshido I wanted to.
Has anyone done a biopic on Count Dante? It would be... I mean, even the true stories about him are fun. And if you throw in all the bullshit he made up and you do it as like a comedy biopic, it would be amazing.
It's not bullshit. It's bullshido. Yeah. I think it would be really interesting to do a movie about John Keehan. That was his real name. Count Juan Rafael Dante. Yes. Do I think the big players in the genre, like not names, will use bot services, paid actors to bend the perception of their games and throttle solo smaller publishers? Throttle is kind of a hard thing to say. I don't think anybody creates games with the intention of choking out other games, except for maybe Wizards of the Coast, who did something stupid like, fuck with the OGL. That was a dumb idea. That was absolutely the worst idea. And I remember I have to say this publicly, okay, guys, just because I feel obliged to say it, but I was stupid enough to vehemently state on Twitter at one time that Wizards of the Coast would never mess with the OGL. They'd be morons to do that. They would just, it would ruin all their advertising and everything else. I mean,
Well,
I said
technically you
that.
were right.
Huh?
Technically, you were right. They were morons.
Well, they were morons, yeah. But, yeah, and then literally 3 months later, the OGL proposed changes came out, and the OGL fiasco blew up. And boy, the person who confronted me on that originally was, thankfully never came back to be smug about it. So I'm grateful for that, because, yeah, I really smeared egg on my face on that one. I can't believe I actually trusted in the intelligence of people who don't care about gaming.
Yeah. So hardly anyone has the capacity to do the kind of things Malwinius was talking about other than Wizards, but people will engage in petty bullshit. Right down to a minuscule level, review bombing, going in and trashing someone's reputation. I've been on the receiving end of most of it, and I'm also kind of plugged into sci-fi writing, horror writing, and I kind of get a hint now and then of the kind of petty bullshit going on in the romance authors circles for some reason. But it gets even pettier there. People will create false accounts to go in and leave bad reviews for books of other authors that they feel are competing with them. And we were talking like, $5 worth of sales, and people will be that petty.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, people will do that shit, but not on any sort of grand scale. It's not even necessary, really. But Wizards, I mean, they use Pinkertons, so I wouldn't put anything past Wizards.
Yeah. Yeah, just when you think you can actually trust big corporation, they prove that there's a reason they're big corporation. So, I don't know.
But
I guess I could...
So what I think Wizards are going to do, so they've got all these computer game people in charge now. They're going to try and turn D&D into a walled garden so that you get locked into D&D and you never even become aware of any other games. You'll be buying their books, you'll be playing their game through their virtual tabletop, locked into that. People will sink money and they'll feel like, oh, I've sunk all this money and so on into this site, into these books, the electronic version of the books, probably. So that will lock a lot of people in. If gamers as a whole kind of accept that, Wizards are going to make a lot of money, most of it from a relatively small number of whales. They won't feel like they have to please the rest of us. And in the worst case scenario, the rest of the hobby will shrink a lot. I don't think it'll ever completely go away, but it'll shrink.
Yeah.
Or alternate timeline, people see that for the bullshit that it is, and D&D suffers, and that's everyone else's gain, as it has been in the past.
Yeah, that is my hope. It's kind of like the Come Lately crew who only play 5e, and they only got interested because of Critical Role or cosplaying or whatever, and aren't really, serious, system analysts or something like that, like, the rest of us will live in their own little, D&D, VTT world where they pay, $5 for some cool digital dice and miniatures that have special animated effects or a special pose or whatever. That's fine. If that's what they want to spend their money on and that's the game they want to play, then that's cool. I think at this point, D&D has pretty much burned its bridge with most of the older players and gamers who have seen them for what they are, which it's extremely disappointing because going into 5th edition, it was all of the older players who loved all the previous editions that initially bought 5e and made them all their initial money and kept that afloat before the Critical Role bubble burst and brought all these new people in, and the virus of unspecified Chinese origin, you know.
China, that's where the fun is at. China, that's where the fun is.
Yeah. Before all that happened.
Yeah, I think if anyone was going to be in a position to pull a Paizo this time around, it would have been Critical Role. But I think they goofed by publishing Candela Obscura before Daggerheart, and I think they're past their peak now. It's hard to tell because they've got their own streaming service that people are subscribing to now, but their numbers everywhere else have been on a decline for quite some time at this point. If they'd had Daggerheart ready when they were at their peak popularity, they could have done a Paizo. But as things stand now, I don't like making definitive predictions, but I don't think they're it.
Yeah, I agree. The people who've played with Daggerheart said that it's fun. I think was it Dice and Discussions or Discussing Dungeons or whomever the Irish lady is.
Oh, Dungeons and Discourse, I think.
Dungeons and Discourse, yeah. We got to get her on the show one of these days. Maybe we can since Harmony knows her. But but yeah, apparently she enjoys Daggerheart, which is interesting. I haven't gone back to take a look at the Daggerheart rules since we looked at them initially. But I guess they've gotten fleshed out to the point where you actually can play it now to some degree. Although it breaks my initial rule, which is there's no physical copy. So I'm sorry if I can't sit on the toilet and read a copy of it, then you know.
Yet, yeah, they are still playtesting.
Yeah. Hey, Crafty Matt. Yeah. RPG Grandma, you're not buying new products from WotC. RPG Grandma, in fact, she gets into older products, you know, like from Arduin or Dragon Tree and stuff like that. And that's what's kind of cool too. It's good to remember that a lot of the gonzo, you know, off the wall stuff was being made way back in the day for D&D as well as it is today. You know, fantasy heartbreakers exist for a reason.
Yeah,
and definitely
D&D,
some of those
D&D, but better in this one very specific way.
Yeah, well, I mean that's all Palladium is, right?
Yeah.
Daggerheart, you can actually play it now to some degree. Thanks, Aaron. I don't know, man. I haven't even played Daggerheart, so I can't say for sure if it's playable or if it's a good system or a bad system. I mean, you know, as soon as they drop a book, I'll be happy to take a look at it and
book and tokens and a turn marker and cards, and yes, that's what's putting me off a bit. Yeah, at least with Savage Worlds, everyone can scare up something to use as tokens, and everyone's got a deck of cards, regular playing cards somewhere. But Crafty was mentioning Cobalt Press. I don't know. I think they fumbled the ball. People were hyped to see what they had, and what they have doesn't really seem to be much of anything. And I'm not seeing any real hype or interest. So I don't know.
Pathfinder destroyed in my opinion, destroyed their own fan base whenever they made second edition, and it was totally different from first edition because that turned me and my group off totally. It's kind of like, we're not going to this second edition garbage.
Yeah, that was dumb for a company whose entire basis was built upon being continuity.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's like, Why did you do this? Why did you cut your own throat? And not to mention they made some stupid choices going into Pathfinder Second Edition, like the half races. Getting all these abilities from each race, and then clearly making something like elves having so many more access to so many more things than the half orcs. I mean, build a system where if you're going to use half races, make all the races have half stuff.
Yes,
not just two of them.
Halfling.
Yeah, halfling, quarterlings. I don't know.
Yes, that's what we used to call.
Yeah, he's. I don't know. Yeah, Green Ronin and Kobold Press shot themselves in the knee. Yeah, I kind of think so too.
Shadow Dark could be built out into something bigger, potentially, and that could be a kind of continuity 5e, which would appeal to a lot of people. But I just don't think there's enough momentum there.
I like Shadow Dark. I really do. Not just buying into the hype or anything else, because believe me, I was one of the last people who got on to the Shadow Dark train. But after I picked up a copy of the book and I looked through the rules and everything, I'm kind of like, there's some really good ideas here. I like this. This is workable. And it definitely does have an old school kind of feel. So she knew what she was doing. And she seems like a really nice person, and I really need to get her on the stream sometime. I say that about a lot of people.
Yes. Just start asking people.
I guess I should.
Just do it. You never know. Worst they can say is no.
Yeah. Hey, Surly. Good to see you. Yeah. I don't see anyone able to make something of the opportunity. Honestly, maybe someone like Games Workshop. They have enough of name and distribute.
They're not
Games Workshop. Nah. Games Workshop are more interested in, making female space marines. And they have people screaming at them to make their orcs more like, D&D orcs. So coming soon, you're going to have an orc army that wears sombreros and hands out tacos in between dishing out death. So,
golf baristas.
Would you like a taco? Oi, I got the enchilada sauce ready right here, boss. I don't know. But yeah, overall, I think the state of gaming is pretty good as far as you have a lot of choices now. There's, you have more access to the kind of game you want to play. And I think one of the reasons why the OSR is so good and it is so popular is because of the simple fact that since it's based on D&D, one, it's easy for people to understand and pick up, and two, if you're somebody like, even RPG Grandma, and you look back and you go, look, here's an old Dragon Tree Press book from 1978 or 1981. I can use this. I can get this old book that nobody's ever seen, and I can incorporate all these old things into my brand new old school essentials game, and it'll work 100% perfectly.
It is bloody annoying as a game designer, though, who believes the system matters. That I will get a bigger audience if I just produce some old tap for OSR or 5e rather than something bespoke. But yeah. Wonder how far you can bend the OSR before it breaks and people no longer consider it OSR.
That is kind of a miniature, argument I've had with Dungeon Delver. I'm like, yeah, I people are always talking about, AD&D best edition ever, not to be beaten, and then of course you've got the Bro SR, which are like, AD&D rules as written, best edition ever.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, even, even some of your most stalwart AD&D groups outside of the BroSR are willing to homebrew or bend the rules or change the rules. And then at what point, do you have a ship of Theseus? Should you?
Is Morkborg OSR?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Scarlet Heroes is pretty much OD&D, but it isn't.
OSR is like a state of mind, man.
Yeah. I don't know. Castles and Crusades is the threshold where OSR breaks.
So which side of the line is Castles and Crusade?
Yeah. And Dueling Dragons for $5. Thank you very much, Greg. We haven't... Yeah, let's do Sesame Cake.
Mr. Homolka? Well, stop eating my sesame cake. Stop eating my sesame cake!
Why does the OSR have to be TSR based? Yeah, I don't understand that either. I mean, just because that's where it started.
Yeah, I mean, I think I set myself a time limit on what should be considered. Like you call things vintage or antique past certain numbers of years. Right, so I think things through to about the mid 80s, I think, should count as OSR.
Yeah.
And Ronin is OSR in that sense. So,
yeah, I mean,
or will be when it's done.
I have ideas for something that is OSR based, but it's different enough from OSR. Is it still OSR because I added in 2 more stats and I changed the way the magic system used? Is Chubby Funster's Ambition and Avarice, is it OSR because it only has spells that go up to 7th level, so it's severely modified the spell system? Where are we with that, Yeah. Smaller publishers, definitely. Yeah. GURPS. What is GURPS? And that's something we really haven't talked about is point buy systems. They're very different from OSR and that sort of thing, and getting people to be interested and involved in it. We dallied with GURPS for a while because we liked the superhero system rules for GURPS. Personally, I found GURPS to be so utterly, absolutely broken that it was ridiculous. Or perhaps it was the fact that the GM allowed the system to be broken so badly by another player at the table. Which gets back to, my whole rant about cheating and exploits.
Yeah, I reckon any game 40 years or older should count as old school, and we should be seeing retro clones of those. And to an extent we are, because MERP was 1984 and we've got old school clones of that. Marvel Superheroes was 1984. We've got old school clones of Phase Rip.
Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, this Saturday we're going to be talking to a guy who is using a variation of the Face Rip rules, because we're going to be talking to Alexander McCree, who's going to be talking about his Ascendant Volume 2 comic book. But of course, knowing our panel, we will talk to him about the Ascendant game. Yeah. Which, as I understand it, uses a variation of Face Rip. The only thing I hated about Face Rip, I liked Marvel because it was easy to get into and it was easy to understand and easy to play. The only problem was it ended up becoming a case of, oh, well, this guy's going to beat this guy easily because, he's unearthly, whereas this guy is only, Shift X or whatever,
Well, there's no guarantees, but...
So,
I have the complete line of Macho Women with Guns, and I wrote the D20 version for Mongoose Publishing.
I have the old gray cover Macho Women with Guns and Warrior Nun, or
Renegade Nuns on Wheels, Batwing
Renegade
Bimbos
Nuns
from
on Wheels,
Hell,
and Batwing Bimbos from Hell. Yeah, I've got
and
all
Macho
those.
Women with Guns, the final chapter or something, which was the bonus book.
Yeah, stuff made by 3G3. I've got the original ones. Yeah, and that is another thing to be said about the state of gaming too. Whatever genre that you want to play in, it's pretty much out there, man. You know, I don't think I've seen a game that either couldn't a game system that couldn't be adapted to something you wanted to do or something that already exists. I mean, if you want to play dark fantasy, you have lots of options. If you want to play high fantasy, you have lots of options. If you want to play heroic fantasy, you have lots of options. If you want to play superheroes, you have lots of options. If you want to play Western, you don't have that many options. Maybe that's where we're at, huh?
Oh, yeah, too much.
I mean, you got Boot Hill, and you had, what is it, Sidewinder, that came out for 3rd edition, which was okay. It had some good ideas, but it wasn't really... You ended up with characters... Well, you ended up with the same problem you always have with 3rd edition, which is you had characters with tons and tons of hit points and guns that just couldn't whittle people down fast enough. So you had gunfights that would take 4 hours because, you know, people were busy. Like, oh, well, he's still got 50 hit points and your gun only does 2d6.
Yeah. That's always the problem.
Are we reaching peak saturation where people are getting analysis paralysis on what to play? And yeah, I mentioned that earlier. It's like, are we? I don't know. I don't know if we can ever reach peak saturation. Because the deal is, it's like every time somebody has a new idea, they put out a new game.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of our heartbreakers are coming from. Because everybody wants to do things a little differently.
It's not that I want gatekeepers, it's that I want some kind of vague quality control. I mean, back before RPGNet really went to shit, you would have things that were called RPGNet darlings that would kind of bubble up from hype on the forums, and that was a reasonable sort of guide to things that were at least interesting and got people's attention. But where do you go now? Social media is so algorithmically compromised that you can't rely on word of mouth there. And most people have advertising blocked, and advertising isn't terribly effective on social media either anyway. All the big YouTubers seem to be wedded to one system pretty much. I don't know where you go to learn about things anymore.
Yeah. Funster, I don't know about the market necessarily choosing the winning games in the long run. And the only reason I say that is because the hard, sad truth of the matter is, outside of the big game companies or the companies that choose to publish independently, you do have one particular choke point on all the marketing for gaming, and that is what drive-through RPG will carry, because they're the biggest source of distribution for games. They're the biggest source for finding games, old, new, and whatever. And if you're like, you know, the Red Room, you're not even allowed to publish on that platform. And the Red Room is doing banger numbers, apparently. I mean, Miguel and Sylvia just never stop coming out with a new book. I mean, it's like I get a new email every other day with them dropping a new product, to the point where I'm just like, I love you guys, but my wallet cannot keep up with you. You know, Lamentations of the Flame Princess even uses drive-through RPG, but even all of their products don't get put on drive-through RPG, so you still have to go through their website to buy stuff.
Yeah.
So Crafty Matt says, that's what you mean if everyone is playing their own game, where are the shared stories of gaming conquest? Not talking about in-game stories, but game store stories. Yeah. Well, I mean, how many people are actually gaming their game in game stores? I mean, for example, okay. How often have you gone into a game store and seen people with their shiny, brand new Lamentations of the Flame Princess books playing a Lamentations game? Because I'm willing to bet not too many.
Stores all have to be family friendly now, so.
Yeah, not only that, but game stores aren't even game stores anymore. As anybody who has ever owned a game store, has run a game store, been involved in a game store, will tell you the card market has taken over the game stores. And, I mean, you can't just keep product on shelf. You can't just keep a wall of TTRPG products and expect to stay in business unless you're independently wealthy. Like, if I was Mr. Beast, if I had Mr. Beast's level of money, I'd open up game stores that just had games on there. Yes, they would lose money because I don't have cards, but that would be where all the gamers would come,
Yeah, board games, card games, and collectibles. Quite often, game stores I used to go to and love, RPGs are relegated to one sad bookcase at the back of the store now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The comic book store used to, but now it looks mostly cards. Yeah. And even the comic book stores aren't comic book stores anymore because comic books aren't selling all that well. Yeah. Now a lot of those have converted to manga.
Yeah, you can't blame the people running the stores, though. I mean, that's gotten harder and harder anyway, so they have to go where the money is. There's not the spare room financially not to chase the cash.
Exactly. The sad thing is the game stores that are the most successful are the ones that are catering to what's being purchased. Well, what's being purchased isn't indie titles, because unfortunately it's the mainstream titles that people know and the mainstream titles that sell.
Yeah.
You can keep a copy of Shadowrun on your shelf. How many people are going to buy it? Only the people who know.
I think Valban's right, though. We need to calibrate what we think of as a success. Because, like I was saying earlier about all the MMO companies chasing WoW, if they'd kept their sights set a little lower, and if they'd been happy being a profitable niche game, things would have gone a lot better for a lot of them. And similarly in tabletop gaming, but popularity and financial success is no guarantee of quality. Usually the opposite.
Mm-hmm. And then of course there's the other part of the friendly local game store. The friendly local game stores aren't friendly local game stores anymore. Because who's buying the games? Well, if you're an old school player like us, chances are you don't feel welcome in these stores. Simple fact, because the people who are in the store buying the stuff are, the kids who saw Critical Role or whatever and want to play the Critical Role game. What are they playing on Critical Role? I want to buy that game. Ooh. It's 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Let's play that. Oh, no, you can't sit at our table. You have the wrong politics.
Or skin color.
Or skin color. Yeah.
Whatever else.
Or worse. Or I'm just like, where's your hat, orc? Aren't you supposed to be wearing a hat? So I don't know. Are they friendly local game stores anymore? I think they're just game stores. I don't think they're really friendly.
Yeah. I mean, the OGGM has his horror stories about his encounters in game stores with people.
Yeah, I mean, if I sit down at the table and at a game store, and I tell people, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to be running, Scarlet Heroes, and immediately I bust out with, so you all start out in a slave camp. I'm going to have everybody that half the players at the table, unless they're in their 40s and 50s, are probably going to get pissed off at me, get up, scream at me, and yell at me, and complain at their game store and get me kicked out.
I think you are lucky. So back when Satine was still the D&D brand ambassador, I met up with her when she was doing her world tour of game stores and things, and we went around a whole bunch of stores in London. And everyone who came out to meet her were that type of person who's hostile to the older gamers. I was getting the evil eye a bit from a few of them who seemed to know who I was. So, yeah, certainly. And ironically, those were the same people that turned on her later on. But yeah, it's been a negative experience to me. This is why I've stopped going to conventions as well.
Mm-hmm. So your other choices are gaming online. Well, as we've personally seen gaming online, people can be kind of flaky. It just or maybe they're not in the mood or whatever, and they don't show up, or it's more difficult to convey stuff sometimes through online mediums. I mean, without a VTT or some way of setting up a game board or something like that to show people visually what's going on, you really have to get creative about how you describe things, or you really have to abbreviate, how you say things and stuff. Not to mention the fact that, there's the whole streaming thing in the first place. What kind of audience are you going to reach through your streaming? The other part of it too is the local game stores do get kind of gut punched because let's face it, Amazon is a thing. Greg and I, Iries and I, and Ironcaster, we all sat down looking at all these cool looking dice. We were like, ooh, these dice are cool. And I'm a little bit of a dice goblin. I'm a lot less of a dice goblin these days than I used to be. But back in the heyday of D&D, especially during the 3.0 era, when I was actually working in a game store and we would get shiny new dice on the shelf all the time, and they started coming out with all the different sets like elemental dice, and and I still remember the game company that created the mammoth dice that were actually like carved out of mammoth tusks or whatever, mammoth bones. They were selling for $100. If you're a dice goblin and you look on the shelf at the store, generally speaking, your dice cost anywhere between $5 to $10, or unless you want to get the special, dice made out of aircraft aluminum that costs $45 for a set or some shit, Why should I pay these prices? I can get up on Amazon and buy 20 sets of dice, 20 full sets of dice with dice bags, and they look really cool. And I pay $23. All I got to do is wait a couple of days for them to get shipped to me, and bam, I've got them.
Yeah, or even cheaper from Wish and Temu and places like that. Which yeah, but it's a good place for dice if you don't mind Chinese slave labor.
Well, I mean, they're going to make the dice one way or the other, right?
Yeah,
might as well buy them. As I've noted on more than one occasion, every time you go into a dollar store and you see tons and tons of plastic crap on the shelf, it was made in China,
Yeah.
But that's the thing, Amazon regularly was running all kinds of specials on D&D books, 5th edition books. In fact, that's pretty much how I got my collection. Was somebody handed me $200 for painting commissions and stuff like that, and at that time we were playing 5th edition, so I was like, oh, this is a good chance for me to buy some 5th edition books to keep playing with the group. Got up on Amazon and I saw all their deals for 5th edition books, selling them well below game store prices and stuff. Bought up $200 worth of books and pretty much got my whole 5th edition collection that way. And this was before the OGL controversy and before Tasha's and before all the crap for 5th edition. But yeah, I mean, you got game companies you got online game retailers like Amazon and stuff that are undercutting the game stores. You have companies like, I showed off Identico the other day. I didn't buy that on Amazon or anything else. I bought that directly from the manufacturer itself.
Yeah.
You have Kickstarters. I had my local game store people. I told, when I got my set of Cthulhu Death May Die, I had gotten it from Kickstarter. And they said, yeah, do you want to demo that here? And I said, yeah, sure. I'd be happy to play it for you guys. Or play it with your customers and stuff. Because they were going to start carrying it too. Well, the store owner's like, you should have bought it here. And I'm like, well, yeah, if I'd have bought it here instead of on the Kickstarter, I wouldn't have gotten the giant Cthulhu. Because that's not something that retailers can have. Same thing with Kingdom Death Monster. I used to piss off my friendly local game store because I want to play Kingdom Death Monster in there. Well, you can't buy that at the game store. You have to buy it directly from the company. So, of course, it cuts the game store out. So, what is the game store really making money on? Snacks?
Yeah. you had these, before COVID, you had all these board game cafes popping up. Maybe we'll see some more of that. That seems... Because I think people have a desire to get together that will slowly come back. And the high streets need places that are kind of destinations where people have a reason to go into town now, because you don't to shop. So maybe that'll turn into something given enough time.
Yeah. So what else can we say about the state of gaming? Have we exhausted this topic, or is it so broad that we really don't have an end to it? I almost kind of feel.
Well, I think. See, I was asked one of these for my Roll for Insight. I was asked pretty much this question. I don't know when the video's dropping, at some point somewhere. But I said in that, so here's a quick preview. I don't know how much we can predict until we see what happens with the new edition of D&D. I think that is going to be a watershed moment one way or the other. Either that walled garden corporate in-house sort of affair is going to work, and that's going to form a new business model that only a handful of bigger companies are going to be able to glom onto, or it's going to fail and that'll be bad for D&D but good for the rest of the industry. But until that happens, until we see how their new VTT actually works in the wild, how many people sign up to it and so on, I don't think we know. I don't think we can though.
And Funster, you say that you think the future of gaming is designing for VTT, and you think you could do better as independents. While I agree with that, you have to remember who controls the VTTs. If it's what is it, Foundry or whatever like that, or what is it? What's the one that you guys use?
Roll20. They're the ones that have merged with Drive-Thru.
Yeah. So Roll20 has some very partisan people who own it, and they might not necessarily like some of the games that you want to run on their VTT. They may disallow them. They may stop you from it.
Yeah, that's a worry for us, obviously.
Yeah. If they don't like the way you do it or they don't like what you're playing, I mean, it's like, dare I say it, if somebody decided to start running like Lamentations of the Flame Princess stuff on there, would they allow it? Would they get upset about it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's certainly within their power to stop people from doing it after they catch it. And that is a choke point for gaming. I think Discord is a little bit more open, but now people are starting to tell me that Discord is starting to get kind of clampy on that stuff. Foundry, all these other systems that are coming out. That's why I was excited when all the RPGs announced that they were going to be doing something. And they're not going to be doing a VTT, but they're doing a service for online gaming, which I think is cool for, matchmaking and all that. But even they are kind of being hamstrung by what they can and can't do. It's like, if their sponsors or stuff are not going to support them if they have such and such, then that hamstrings everybody. I mean, and who the industry decides to hamstring is largely dependent on whatever criteria they choose. Like let's say, for example, they didn't want to support Castles and Crusades. Obviously, they're cutting a huge chunk of the player populace out because Castles and Crusades is picking up popularity really quickly. And a lot of people love them. But like, let's say, all these companies decided, well, we don't want Castles and Crusades because we object to Steven Chenault's haircut. Well, all of a sudden, you can't list games with, Castles and Crusades in it. You have no access to that tabletop through VTT or anything else. So you're forced to try to find some other way to do it. And yeah, in-person gaming is obviously the best gaming, no doubt. I mean, I will die on that hill. The best gaming you're ever going to get is in person with friends, but it's not always an option. Ironcaster is my friend. We can't get together for a game because he lives in frickin' Michigan and I live in Texas. Grim is my friend, but we can't get together because he lives, like across the frickin' ocean. We'll find local friends. Well, what if I don't want to?
I live out in the sticks. People won't travel to me, so I only get to game in person once every month and a half. I'm lucky. So.
So yeah, I mean,
Briefly, before we sign off, because I need to rest before Tabletopless.
Of course.
Can someone explain to me what this Demons and Dragons fuss is about? Because that's the second time it's come up today. So I'm trying to figure out what it's all about.
Gothic Church guy is selling a renamed Basic Fantasy RPG PDF for $20 on Demons and Dragons. Huh. Our own Nick Beardia is doing that. What is it? Dicing and Demons or something?
Something like that.
Oh, so the guy's plagiarizing Basic Fantasy. Oh.
Right. This is CP ground to me because isn't the Basic Fantasy RPG open, and therefore you're kind of allowed to an extent, depending which OGL license they used. So while it might be shitty behavior, isn't it like allowed?
I mean, if you want to cite an example, I mean, there's always Pathfinder First Edition, which basically did the same thing.
Yeah, but then the other way, there was that guy who was basically copying and selling all the Tunnels and Trolls content using stolen art and all sorts of other things. So that was unambiguously a ripoff.
Oh, it was a copy paste job. Okay. So that's not good. By the way, you got a new avatar kit. Nice. Yeah, I wouldn't want to engage in word for word plagiarism. That's just crap.
It's lazy and shit. Yeah, but I don't know. It just feels a bit. Because that's part of the point of open gaming is to nick stuff. But if there's absolutely no creativity applied, then fair enough.
Yeah. Well, I think like Labyrinth Lord is like open source, basically, isn't it? And I think a lot of Kevin Crawford's initial offerings were based around Labyrinth Lord, but they obviously were not one for one copy pastes or anything like that. Obviously, Kevin put in his own ideas and his own spins using those systems, which is fine. But yeah, one for one copying is.
Yeah, it does look like it's been taken down. So
yeah. I think people who do that, but I think people who do that will get caught, and they'll get exposed for the crap product that it is, and word of mouth will hit people. I mean, it's like, yeah, I understand that social media gets throttled, and our voices don't necessarily travel as far because of social media tampering, but word does eventually get around that, yeah, if you're basically just ripping off a product or something like that, yeah, people will know. Yeah, he wrote supplemental material for LL, not core game materials. Yeah, exactly. But with open gaming, how it is in laws that say you can't copyright games mechanics, it's surprising it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have taken much work to just change the wording and things, but
I mean, I could make a one for one copy of OSE, just but if I just start changing one or two mechanics, or I rename all the classes and write some new flavor text and stuff like that, that's a new game, isn't it? I mean, technically. And that is...
I was just curious because it keeps coming up and I didn't know anything about it.
And maybe that's one of the downsides of publishing off of OSR, is the fact that because it doesn't take a lot to differentiate one OSR product from another, they do kind of run together a little bit, maybe too easily. I don't know, man. That one's a hard one to say. How much effort? Yeah, it's like Aaron says. Yeah, how much effort goes into your new class or into your new game and all that stuff like that? Do you have to have before? Well, it becomes the ship of Theseus. In this case, you want a ship of Theseus.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I think what can we actually summarize for the state of gaming? What can we sum this up with? Finish it out.
We don't know. Because things are going to change soon. And we need better ways to navigate what's out there, because it's a nice problem to have, but there's too much stuff.
Yeah, and not enough time to enjoy it all. Best we can do is keep reviewing stuff, keep looking at stuff, my unboxings are not necessarily reviews of the game mechanics and stuff themselves, but inevitably, when we're looking through a new product that I've unboxed, I'm going to highlight stuff that catches my attention really quickly, that I can point out as a starting point for where you can investigate the game. Like when I opened Ambition and Avarice 2, the first thing I pointed out was the trophy system that I love so much. And if that caught your attention and you want to investigate those mechanics for your game and you choose to buy it, because you liked that, because I pointed it out, then I guess I've done my job, you know. I haven't necessarily sold you a new game system, but I've sold you something you can use. And that's good, you know. Word of mouth is the best thing that we can do to help each other navigate the waters. And we know that the waters are going to get churned up pretty soon because, yeah, D&D's new edition is going to drop. And despite other people just saying, well, I don't engage with any Dungeons and Dragons products at all. I don't know why you guys still do. Why do you guys still keep talking about them? Why don't you just shut up about them? Just, you know, stop talking about them completely. We can't. We really can't, because it's the biggest fish in the ocean, and every time it moves, it creates ripples that affects all of the other little fish around it in one way or another. So whatever D&D does, the rest of the market will inevitably follow, fall into line, or otherwise swarm around it. So,
yeah, and Kit's right. We haven't had time to talk about solo gaming, which, yeah, is weird.
So next week, then. Next week, we will talk about solo gaming. That'll be our topic for next week. Thank you very much, Kit, for suggesting it. Yeah. So there we go. Until next time, guys, thanks for hanging out with us. Join Grim on his game tonight. Join me on Tuesday with Geeks. Enjoy. Remember, we have more entertainment now than ever. Go participate in some. Go enjoy it.
Yeah, go play some games.
Go play some games. Or, as Bathmat says,
What can I say? I like everybody. Everyone is welcome here. Come on down, sign the contracts. We've got a spot for you here. We don't discriminate. We treat everybody equally down here in hell. This has been your Lord Baphomet telling you, stop playing with dice. Go play with some boobies or something.
good night, everybody.
Look, a Dungeons and Dragons rhyme!